The customer will always understand if you set the right expectations and meet them. If you tell the customers, I'm going to deliver something in 2 days, and you deliver it in 2 days, customers are happy.
Welcome to another episode of the Ecommerce Toolbox Expert's Perspective. Joining us today all the way over from the UK, we got Suhail Gaffar, who is the VP of Global Ecommerce at the Tops company. So welcome, Suhail.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, I always like to start by learning a bit more about your career. So maybe talk to us a bit about your career journey and how you ended up in your role.
Oh, yeah. I've had a pretty interesting career journey. I like to tell everyone I've done the trifecta. So I spent a lot of time in the supply chain, logistics, express courier industry with DHL, worked globally with them, moved into retail with Mothercare, which is a large sort of a brand for maternity all the way through to teenage years for children's products with international franchising. Moved on to Velcro Companies, which is a major manufacturer of consumer packaged goods, and then ended up at Top. So I've essentially done the 3 segments that allow me to get a wide breadth of experience and views across different industries, working with public and private sector companies. And then I ended up at Tops, where I'm sort of using all of that collective knowledge to try and apply to an area which I say the collectibles industry, which is still very much a green field, where things have not been normalized or there is no norm. There's always something new that you can sort of innovate and drive as far as consumers are concerned.
Yeah, it's great to hear. And I know that you joined Tops right in early 2020, right before kind of the digital collectible industry exploded and before the Fanatics acquisition. So maybe talk to us a bit about what drew you to Tops at that point in your career. Like you mentioned, you had experience in other areas. Like, why did you want to go to Tops?
So I was approached for the role at Tops. And the thing that interested me about the position was Tops is a well-known cultural brand in North America. Growing up, everyone collects baseball cards, and Tops is synonymous with the hobby. Internationally, they were sort of building out that brand and the presence. And the remit that I had for the role was to sort of start the global expansion, take it into Europe, take it far afield. So that was one of the major sort of attractions. The other thing is, having worked in a lot of companies, I've always sort of done startups within large organizations. So this felt like a startup within a large organization, grow the global structure, be agile, build the team as you're sort of developing it, but really do a lot of hands-on work. So setting up infrastructure in Japan, India, Brazil, and 5 European countries, and then sort of moving on from 1 US website to 8 more internationally. That was the thing that drew me to the challenge. And obviously, the journey of, as I mentioned, it's a green field. So defining what that experience looks like and then setting certain standards and being part of that sort of that innovation was the draw.
Very cool. And a follow-on question on that is, obviously the collectibles, things kind of pop off. I'm not an expert in the space. How do you guys think about, like, what is the next rare card? Is some of it luck? How do you kind of get ahead of it? Yeah, I'm curious what some of your thoughts are around that. Like why do certain things come back? Like I don't know, the Charizard card from 20 years ago is now everybody wants it graded, right? Or a certain type of collectible, like a baseball card. Like, how does that stuff kind of transpire in your opinion?
Well, if you think about human nature, we are collectors at heart always. I mean, if you went to the beach as a child, you went and collected seashells. And then some people progress into collecting coins and stamps, or people collect different sorts of things. So we like to collect. Some would say we like to hoard. But at the end of the day, when you go on holiday, you collect memorabilia, you collect certain souvenirs. So collecting is in inherent human behavior. When you look at the collectibles industry, it's really driven by consumers. So as a brand, we will put out cards, we will put out products we feel are going to resonate with consumers. But as you mentioned in your example, there's a card from 20 years ago, which has now come up and is in demand. That's the market deciding what value to put against a card, right? So we have had cards that sell out, and then on the secondary market, they sort of go for 4 times the price or 10 times the price. I mean, recently we've had at an auction where we had the highest bid that ever came in for a card, the Paul Skeens card. So at the end of the day, it's the consumer and the market that decides the value to place with the card. What we try to do is to capture a moment that's relevant in sports, in entertainment, that would resonate with the consumers based on what we know is popular, based on what we know consumers have sort of given us signals that they would like. And then after that, it's really up to the market to decide.
Yeah. And when I think of Tops, I think going back 10, 15 years ago, I think of you guys more of not as an online store, right? I think of you guys in a completely different context. Maybe talk to us a bit about how you guys have had to adopt to be more of an omnichannel approach. I think you were quoted in saying e-com is one of the just a piece that amplifies the brand overall. Like maybe talk to us a bit about how you view omnichannel. What does that mean in this context? And what are some of the things that are specific to your industry around being an omnichannel retailer?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think, again, if you go back to how we have evolved, right, in terms of online experiences, there was a time when people would shop in the morning or in the evening online, because that's when you had access to the internet because you were at home, or during lunch breaks, right? That changed with the proliferation of mobile devices and always on sort of infrastructure. And then the consumer behavior shifted. You couldn't predict when you would get a sales drop. Now, as that happens, the lines between what is online, what is in store are blurred. I mean, if you look at, and I look at my son today, he doesn't think in terms of, oh, I'm going to go to that website to buy something. He's like, I'm going to buy something from this brand. Now, whether he chooses to buy it through the social commerce outlet, whether he chooses to buy it through a marketplace, or whether he wants to physically go into a store, touch it and buy it, that's the consumer choice. So the way we have evolved, the way we have changed, I mean, it's not an if question, it's how soon should brands actually stop thinking in terms of channels and start thinking in terms of the entire experience. Because at the end of the day, it's the experience that the consumer wants. The consumer does not care or want to know about, oh, you've got a sales department that's responsible for retail. You've got a sales department that's responsible for online. They know that they want to buy a product. And in this day and age where instant gratification is the norm, having to wait for a product or having to sort of queue up for certain things, people just don't have the patience. So the way this has happened across the world has shaped consumer behavior. I mean, if you go to Asia, in Asia, they didn't even go from the computers. I mean, we went from a desktop to a laptop to mobile devices. If you go to China, they went straight to the mobile device. So if you go to any site in China, it's long form. I used to do a comparison. I would take a PDP from Amazon, and then I would take a PDP from Alibaba Tmall. The Amazon PDP would end and the Alibaba Tmall would keep scrolling. And the reason for that was you had to provide enough information so the consumer can make a good decision and a best decision based on what they're seeing to buy the product, because they don't have the facility to have stores where you can physically go and see that. So all of those sort of evolutions require that people only think in terms of omnichannel. And from a Tops perspective, obviously, as the demographics change, as the people who come into the hobby are the younger ones, they want things online. The type of products we started releasing, Tops now is a great example, which is something that is built for online. It's in the moment, capturing the moment for whatever fandom you follow, and then making that available to your customers. And that really is the shift in terms of bridging that gap between a store experience and online experience. But at the end of the day, we want to cater to all the experiences because the fans choose where they want to interact. And they can choose to interact online right now and then offline sometime else. We just need to be available in those places. And hence, when I say e-commerce is just one of the components about the brand being amplified, that's true. That's just one of the components because you need to have that stitched up, seamless experience, which is the holy grail for most brands, really.
Yeah, and I know Tops is a bit different because you, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys mainly have wholesale relationships with brick and mortar footprint. Is that correct?
We have relationships here with brick and mortar stores. We have online as well.
Exactly. So maybe talk to me a bit about, like, I'm assuming some of these brick and mortar establishments are owned by independent store owners that you guys basically wholesale to. How do you guys balance when you can't control the brick and mortar experience? Like a lot of the retail omnichannel conversations I have is with the traditional brand. They have 150 stores, they have online, they can make sure that the inventory is synced, they control the in-store experience, they make sure that both teams are rowing in the same direction. Like, how do you do that where you don't necessarily control the in-store experience for some of the retailers that sell your product?
It's through partnerships that we have with all our retail partners. It's about supporting them. It's about providing the best practices in terms of the store experience, in terms of the product experience, providing collateral and any support required to ensure that the customer experience is the same across wherever they go to a store in Minneapolis, whether they go to a store in Atlanta, or whether they go online. So it's about building those partnerships and supporting our partners as we sort of innovate and create new ways for customers to experience the brand.
Very cool. And taking a bit of a right turn here, talk to me a bit about NFTs. I know that those came on the market pretty hot in 2020, 2021. Maybe talk to us a bit about, obviously you're a global executive for a large brand. Talk to me a bit about how you guys are thinking about NFTs.
So NFTs, yeah, as you said, 2020, 2021 was the heyday when NFTs went really viral and they grew. And as with anything like that, and if you look back and the dot-com sort of phenomenon is very similar, it grew and then all of a sudden the bubble burst. But then there was a consolidation and there was a right sizing. I feel NFTs have a lot to offer, not only in the collectible space, but as they have sort of proliferated in a lot of other areas. So moving forward, there is a function from a collectibles perspective, but also more from a utilitarian perspective on NFTs, especially when you start looking at regulation on the blockchain, when you try to look at traceability and those sort of things. That's where they come into their own. But for me, really, there is going to be a resurgence from what I see. There is a market correction that has happened, but it's really about innovation that is going to happen within that space as things move forward. But it won't be as bullish as it was when we saw it in 2020 or 2021.
Very cool. I agree. Do you think NFTs will be sold as standalones or as digital backups when you own the physical card?
That's really dependent on the product and what the market appetite is. Ideally, you would not have an NFT and a card separate. You would actually have it with the same sort of collector.
Exactly.
Right? Because it's your digital equivalent in the metaverse versus in real life.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe talk to me. Obviously, you said that you have the trifecta in your career. You obviously know a lot of people in the industry. Talk to me a bit about some of the biggest mistakes you see brands make when they're siloed in their omnichannel experience.
Well, I mentioned that one already, where when you start looking at the P&L from individual teams, you end up having conflicting objectives. A very simple example in retail. I bought something online. I go to the store says, no, we can't take your return. You have to send it back to the warehouse. I can understand the logic because I'm in the industry, but that's a broken customer experience. I mean, that's creating a lot of friction. We used to have that at Mothercare, and the challenge would be customers would come into the store, look at the product, then buy online. And then the stores are not incentivized from that perspective. Or the store has reached their target of stock clear out, and then a customer comes and gives you a return, and then they end up having to tag that inventory on. So because there are conflicting KPIs, you have that issue. So really what brands need to do is to harmonize the playing field, right? And say, okay, if a store is within a certain postcode, it gets an allocation of the online sale. Because in some way, shape, or form, that store has helped the customer, even if it's by just existing and being top of mind for the customer when they search online. We had an experience where when we were consolidating our stores in certain markets, we would see a drop in traffic from those postcodes where a physical store was taken off the high street. So the concept of, hey, you can survive online only doesn't work. If you are a retail brand with a physical presence, you need to ensure that all of those are working to drive customers to keep you top of mind. So the biggest challenge and the biggest mistake brands make is to have those competing KPIs. You need to sort of set single goals because then everyone's working towards that single goal. And that goal should be customer satisfaction. And that drives everything else. And once you have that sort of single goal, that single scorecard, it then drives a lot of the other decisions that people make in terms of technology. It makes a lot of difference to the processes that are put in place. And then obviously the customer interaction that happens, because then you've got one team. Because there are instances where you will call up and say, oh, sorry, this is the customer service for retail, or you need to call this customer service for online support. So that from a customer's perspective is a very fragmented experience. And in today's world where for most brands, customers have a choice, they will go to the place where they are getting less friction and they are getting supported in the way that they choose.
Yeah. And how do you look at this when it's international? I have a recent example. I have some family that lives in the US, bought some stuff in Canada, it was the wrong size, tried to exchange it in the US. It was a completely disjointed confusion of a process. where we had to like return it in Canada and they credited us with a gift card in the US. Anyways, it was a completely broken customer experience. Have you ever tackled that cross border? And I feel like Europe is probably a bigger challenge than it is in North America, because it's probably a bit rarer that in North America you buy something in Canada, try and return it in the US. But I don't know, if you're in France for the weekend, you buy something and then you live in the UK, like how have you seen that done right and done wrong?
How I've seen it done wrong has been customers are told to return it to the place where they bought it from. In your example, send it to the US or send it back to the source, right? How I've seen it done right is when we talk about e-commerce, it's not just the front end experience. I cannot stress that enough. For me, it's more important once the transaction has happened, once the customer has purchased a product, the experience that follows is the one that defines the review that comes out of the customer. So if I have someone who's delivered my product, not delivered my product, or thrown it over the fence and damaged it, I will not remember the lovely email I received from my abandoned cart. I will not remember the website, how easy it was to navigate and how easy it was to check out. I will remember that my delivery was flawed. It was not to the experience that I was expecting. And that's going to be my review. So in this instance, it's not just what the front end experience should be. Brands need to stress on what the fulfillment experience, the last mile, and then the return experience should be. And that's where a lot of providers have come up with varying solutions to support brands to make that returns process seamless, to make it without friction. So you have lots of suppliers who will allow you to send products into a depot locally, and then they would manage the returns process without actually having to jump through certain hoops. So it depends on who you engage as a partner, but it also depends on what the global strategy is. Many brands don't go out with a strategy to sell internationally. It happens organically. And at that point in time, they're like, well, if a customer chooses to buy it and pay the shipping, that's their problem, which is not the way to think about it. You either ensure that if someone is allowed to purchase your product in a geography that you do not have a physical presence in, you ensure that you put in the right levels for them to be able to manage a return or a customer service incident or anything of that sort.
What are some of the telltale signs that your brand might be underperforming against benchmarks or client expectations on this topic? Like, how does this show up in the numbers?
Well, it's much easier now than before. Before you had to go out, run focus groups, run surveys. Now customers will tell you if you just tap onto X or Twitter or social media and have a very active social team listening in on customer sentiment. You have tools that can give you an idea of what the customer sentiment has been. You need to have NPS scores that will guide you. So there are a lot of tools that are available to sort of ensure that you are keeping your finger on the pulse of how your brand is performing. But most importantly, just go out and ask your customers and just ask your internal customers, what is the experience? Do mystery shopping. Because at the end of the day, when you start looking, we are mostly inward facing. When you start getting out and being in the customer's shoes and actually experiencing what the site does, what the journey is from a retail, online, or offline perspective, that would really sort of give you a good amount of insight because you have the background context as to why a certain process is being done a certain way. I know lots of brands that do process improvement workshops. They do Six Sigma, they get people trained on Six Sigma, really to start looking at where can we sort of drive the efficiencies and improvements. So there are various tools now that make it easier. And one example I recently saw was someone actually used ChatGPT to analyze a lot of customer responses to build personas and then come up with more surveys to really inform what that audience would be thinking in terms of sentiment, in terms of experience. So with the proliferation of tools that allow us to really scale up and do things that would take days within hours, I think there's no reason brands should not be taking advantage of that to ensure that they are maintaining the customer experience.
That makes sense. And as we look to wrap up, maybe talk to us a bit about, obviously you have experience across multiple industries and multiple brands. What is something that always rings true regardless of the vertical that you're in when you're on the e-com team?
The customer will always understand if you set the right expectations and meet them. I mean, there's always a thing in e-commerce that, hey, you have to deliver it tomorrow. No, you don't. Unless you are a product that is such utility, if you tell the customers, I'm going to deliver something in 2 days and you deliver it in 2 days, customers are happy. So it all goes down to the customer expectation, knowing the customer expectation of you and living up to that customer expectation. Whether you're in the B2B industry, whether you're in the B2C, whether you're in retail, whether you're in offline or online, that holds true. As long as you understand the customer, what their expectations are, and you meet them consistently, that's true across anywhere. And that's the only recipe for success if it boils down to anything.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for your time, Saeed. Very excited to release this. And where can people find you if they have any questions? Are you active on LinkedIn or?
I'm on LinkedIn, so people can find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thanks, Saeed.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
The Ecommerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives is brought to you by Noibu. To find out more about Noibu and how we can help you debug your e-commerce site and rocket your revenue, visit www.noibu.com. That's Noibu.com. And then make sure to search for the Ecommerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Noibu, thanks for listening.